Satnam, welcome. This is the second time we've attempted a Seth channeling and it didn't go through. And this time our facilitator cannot get into the room. I think she clicked on the wrong link. The Crowdcast gave her a notification from a long time ago when we had to reschedule. And so I reposted the correct link to remind everybody that, yeah, we have a link and it's not the old link. So I did that and then I deleted the old link. So hopefully we'll have enough people here soon. And if anyone feels called to step in on Priscilla's behalf, she's not going to be able to make it. And I get distracted when I don't have someone asking questions, because then I have to get in my head, read a question, get all logical, boom, boom, boom. Yeah. So it would be good to begin your questions that you have for Seth. Does everyone know who Seth is? Do any of you have a background with Seth? No, you don't at all? Okay, so Seth was before Abraham Hicks was around. You read the Seth material? Julie did? Yeah, and Maria knows who Seth is. So Seth was one of the original entities coming through for channeling as a whole, like started this whole thing that we all do now, right? And Seth has a very constructive view of oneness and creativity in a way that bridges ideas of, when we teach oneness, and a lot of people teach oneness in these modern times from 1950, whatever, when A Course in Miracles was channeled and created, until now, it tends to be like, this is the way of oneness, and this is all there is, and this is all we should focus on, and that's it. And oneness can be kind of depressing for people who don't understand why they would come to a creative environment in the first place, why it's necessary, and why ego is important. Seth bridged the gap. And this is what I love so much about him. So again, for those of you just joining, we don't have a facilitator today. I don't have any questions lined up because you don't know who he is, but I can give you some of his concepts. And he began to come through a channel who really did not even know she was a channel. She was just really curious. And in her home one day, she pulled out a Ouija board. That's how this started, right? Open the gates. And something came through, and she and her husband thought it was fascinating. And then eventually they put the board away. And once they felt safe with the entity, and safe that it was, a non-harmful being, Jane realized that she was indeed a channel. She had always been a writer before then. And Seth came through her, and she basically went into trance. She was a trance channel. And she would forget everything, just like I do when I'm in trance. And Seth came through and wrote loads of books that we now call the Seth material, about universal law and parallel realities, about reincarnation, about how ego works and the different layers of ego and why it's there to begin with and why it's important to concepts of oneness, why the ego is necessary. Seth basically made everything make sense. So Seth is one of the beings that I really respect a lot. And he has a lot of really interesting, specific concepts. And he went through Jane Roberts for a long time. And I don't really know who he's coming through now. Entities tend to pick a human and make it their favorite. Like for me, I'm noticing that Lilith tends to be the primary being that wants to come through me, right? Just like with Esther Hicks, she has Abraham. So with Jane Roberts, she had Seth. So yeah, they're amazing, amazing tools, the Seth material. There's just 12 volumes or something of oneness and creativity and universal law and how reincarnation works and, certainty versus uncertainty and how to create in a functional way. So who was he? He doesn't say. When I asked him that question, he said, I am not a personality. I am not a form. But yeah, he did start coming through before ACIM, to answer your question. And he says, I am the essence of a personality. I have created an essence of a personality for you. And that's all that he ever says, is that he is the essence of a personality. I've noticed that this personality is very, a little bit stern, professional, ethical, straight to the point, sometimes sarcastic, but not mean about it, just kind of, just a really different, dry sense of humor. I notice that when I hear him, I hear what I can't identify. His accent is a little unusual. Like at first I thought it might be an English accent or a South African accent, but then I realized it was just virtually unidentifiable to me. So Seth will not, he'll create an essence of a personality so that you trust him and listen. But Seth is a fractal of a being that cannot be defined, not by me, not by anyone. And if you're trying to wrap a human construct around Seth, you never will. This is what is fascinating about Seth. And he gave a name and a personality, and became an essence of a personality so that we would trust and connect and listen, but he does not identify otherwise and probably never will. That's what he says. We're taking your questions for Seth now. We don't have a facilitator today, unless Priscilla happens to find a way to get in or someone feels called to jump on here and facilitate. We probably won't have a facilitator. Is he similar to oneness? He said, I am an essence of a personality that comes through to guide you out of constructs, out of your definitions, a deeper understanding of how to use universal law, not just in your universe, but in all parallel realities, that which you do understand and that which you do not. So I am a tool that has created the essence of a human personality for your pleasure, he says, and throws up his hands like he's an amusement show. What can you tell us today about the highest and best? Someone asked him, and he said, let's review your concept of high and low and best and worst, and then we shall eliminate it. And he moves his hands in energy like this. He says about your question, Anya said, was he ever a personality incarnate? It's not something that's relevant at this time. He said there have been many lives, many teachings, many transformations that occurred when he incarnated, but he no longer chooses to, which makes it irrelevant right now. Seth's primary goal is to bring our attention to what he calls a now point, that's a primary energy center from which you can create, that he's been many personality essences, that he's been through many beings except animals. But animals do tend to respond to him. He's telling me a story about, during the time that he shared teaching you through Jane Roberts, there was a familiar, he calls it. It was a cat, a black cat that was by her side all the time. And he said that the cat quite preferred him. And he says it in this jovial, funny manner. He said, the animal quite preferred me, and it was quite a jovial beast, is how he puts it. I'm trying to imitate his personality for you. He's really funny. He said he did share a life with Jane as an Englishman at some point. And for that reason, his personality essence can connect with hers because of the shared lifetimes between both Jane and her husband. I'm looking in the Ask a Question session to see. Okay. Julie's question is, in the Seth books, there is a part about sleep and sleeping in shorter cycles. Could he talk more about that and how we can adapt it now? Because it feels as if we need a bit more sleep with so much spiritual change, or is sleeping in shorter cycles still beneficial? He said, at this point in collective belief, you believe that you require more and therefore you do. And no matter what I try to share with you about the universal truth that you do not, many of you still continue to believe that you do, and you are the gods of your own beliefs. Therefore, you have created the need to sleep longer. You can be more constructive in shorter REM cycles, but you're not ready for this knowledge at this point. It wasn't acknowledging, you weren't acknowledging this at the time, and you refuse to believe it now collectively. Okay. All right. I'm getting a question about ego, and he is responding. So one of your questions on Patreon had to do with layers of ego and what he has to say about inner ego and outer ego. And he says, each personality, each human has many, many layers of self. Most notably the outer energetic essence of ego, which interacts with your physical world and form. And then the inner ego, which some of you have called inner self or inner child. And its primary benefit and construct is related to the mechanics of constructing and forming and creating within your physical worlds. Notice I said worlds, plural. There are layers upon layers upon layers of parallel existences, and it is infinite. So this existed, when you believe in time, it existed prior to any of your incarnations. And this inner self, what you call inner child or inner self, or whatever you call it, emotional world, this existed before your form when you consider constructs of time. And then the entire self, which I may refer to at this point as an entity, your entire self is a machine with various gears. He's showing me a machine with gears. And this is the wholeness, the entirety of you consists of your various selves and all of your constructs of personality and various selves that have lived and are living in what you call past existences, both physical and non-physical. All of this is here now. This is why you are so curious about what you call the past. You got a giggle out of that, what you call the past. He's kind of like a jovial man. That's the best way I can describe him if I were to describe his essence. Like a professor, a little bit like that, and like a funny teacher. I'm still listening. Give me a second. So you have this. You have the entity of self under all of its constructs and essences that you have created in physical and non-physical planes of existences, and you call it past. You have this and all of your currently reincarnated selves when you begin to remember them and tap into them now. So these essences are you listening now, you perhaps clear across the world in another country, you perhaps in an unborn mother, you perhaps in anything that requires eloquent constructs of consciousness. and mature, evolved constructs of consciousness. So you have you and you that you perceive in past and all of those constructs and all of yourselves that you perceive now, whether you're aware of them or not, in parallel environments now, physical and non-physical environments now. And this creates the entity, which you call soul, but I often call the entire self. But for your understanding now, we will call this soul. So you are generally unaware of this inner self and its many constructs. And although it comes through as what you call intuition, what you call inner voice, what you now, you youngsters, he says, you youngsters are calling psychic abilities. You have this inner voice that you believe that you hear, and you misperceive that it is outside of you. At the point of death or near death, or in current modern times, in your awareness, it is quite fascinating that you perceive these voices and these inner self constructs and intuitiveness, as you call, through near-death experiences and what you call the great human awakening. So at death, your outer ego, which is in charge of thoughts and fears and primitive responses that create an outer world, it lives on and continues to develop. It does not die with the brain matter, for it is not that. But it then absorbs and becomes a part of the entire self, that which you call soul. And this entire sophisticated machine or gestalt that forms this entity of soul. It is also free to evolve as it so will and as it so chooses, and develops new associations that you call personalities, or that I will call essence of personality. Each incarnated self or soul exists in roughly 4 universes, and I'm only going to say 4 because that is all that you can comprehend at this time. Therefore, most of you will become aware eventually, when you choose, of these 4 universes, and each incarnated version of soul or self exists simultaneously in these 4 universes. These 4 universes are the physical universe, which is the result of what you now call, you youngsters call, collective human consciousness, but for the sake of further scientific definition, I will call coordinated mass confusion and mass mental projections. So within this physical universe, it is a collective mass projection on the part of Earth's inhabitants with the most powerful collective beliefs. We will now speak of the dream universe, what you will call the dreaming. Some of you may, you newbies call this the astral world and other things that youngsters are calling it. We will just call it the dream universe, and it is created much in the same way as the physical universe, but it has much rigid natural universal laws. And, it has less rigid, less difficult, less structured universal natural laws. And then you have a parallel or adjacent electrical universe. And this is where your inner self resides primarily, but you are consciously unaware of it when you are mostly aware of the physical universe. And when you view yourself as a physical born and personality, you are unaware of the universe of inner self, which I will now call electrical universe. You often in the Aquarian age call it the cosmos, astral field, the dreaming, many various things. And this is where your inner self and your soul resides, all higher mental activity occurs. And then there's that which you do not understand, that of the unknown, which you are highly uncertain of and only partially grasp in the laws of your science in the physical universe. This is the universe of antimatter. And I will say very little at this point due to your lack of capacity to grasp its various unknown universal laws. So within the various portions of you as self and the various universes which I have described, there are aspects of a single whole. And this you now call oneness. And I will refer to them throughout these teachings separately, just for the sake of understanding. But ultimately, there are no boundaries to self. There are no boundaries to the essence of spirit, which you call soul, just as there are no boundaries to any system of reality within oneness. And yes, creativity is a part of it. All portions of the self, or what you call higher self or soul, contribute to dreams and the dreaming and all universes, and they continue when your outer ego is awakened, as you have called it. Questions? He taps he's got a little thing, like a college professors have a little thing sometimes that they tap when they're trying to get your attention, and he taps it on a huge wooden desk, and he's got these little, I don't know, he comes to me like as a bald, tight suited, like an old English suit on him, like an older man. He shows up like that, even though he reminds me that he is not that. And he tapped it down on a hard wooden desk and he said, questions? Yeah. He's waiting patiently, but I see a couple of them in the ask a question section. What is your understanding of walk-ins and soul gratings and the greater concept of soul? He said, nothing is external of you. It's a matter of becoming aware and grasping the essence into your physical universe of form and creating in this manner. And when you no longer fear to do so, then you believe that something has walked in that could possibly be from the cosmos or from some antimatter world or from some unknown concept. But that is not the way it works in reincarnation and in what you call near-death experiencing. You simply become aware of that which was unknown about your parallel worlds. Is our dream state interacting with other simultaneous dimensions in the now? He nodded and he said, of course, my student, always. He said it so matter-of-factly, of course, my student. Still looking for your questions, and we'll continue a little bit. Someone had a question about reincarnation and how it applies to what he knows as natural law. And he said it is the written and unwritten rule that you have created, although you have misperceived. There are many misperceptions. An example of this misperception would be that cause and effect does not operate from one life to the next. It can and it will if you are still creating in a physical form with various attachments when you are in between what you call parallel universes. And that is misperception, where I cannot provide to you a one mindset answer. Remember that you create when cause begins and when effect sets in when you are resting or in a state of resting in between your awareness of time and before you begin to realize that you're even out of it. For example, there are many misperceptions that humans never reincarnate as animals, and this cannot explicitly be answered. I have seen many incarnated essences within animals. Some are aware of this and then carry that pattern throughout their incarnated and reincarnated experiences. And some choose to not honor this expression at all. And therefore, how can I say that a human has never reincarnated inside of an animal? Perhaps this human is aware that they choose not to do so and then create that as their own egoic law. And then the next generation perceives this as the one truth, and the next generation rebuts this law and creates their own truth. Do you understand that the concept of creative truth is exacerbated, withheld, and then exacerbated and withheld time and time and time again? There is a rest period between incarnations when all of these laws have the chance to reset. Because again, laws are much less stringent in this adjacent universe. And many times you will occupy many planes of existence and only become aware of a few. Because if you are aware of the contracts that you choose to create in advance of such a setting, what need would there be to creatively be in a physical existence to begin with? Would this not zap the joy straight out of creativity, he says, and he moves his hands like this and puts his hand down, like his head down like this, and there's like these little bifocals that he's looking at me like this towards and raising his eyebrow. He is incredibly theatrical, at least in my workings with him so far. He says there's a question. Let's look and see. Jesus says, I am an inventor with infinite creativity from the mechanical side to understanding the whole creation of the universe. I presently possess a higher knowledge than before, but my creativity leads me to understand what was once created for science fiction is possible to create as scientific fact. He nodded and he said, indeed, continue. Back to your question. My questions range from abilities such as levitation, telekinesis, flying by, thought, all the way to questions of technological innovation, dealing with gravity and anti-gravity, faster than light travel, portals to stargates, crystals for energy storage, propulsion, healing, in other words, Atlantic technologies. I am starting to, oh wait, this is the next session. Okay. I believe what happened was Jesus could not get in the entirety of his question via the length of that explanation. And Seth says he will wait on the question after your explanation. So we'll move on to Maria's question now. We'll get back to you in a minute when you can kind of put the question more simply, he says. Maria's question, I am beginning to write a creative novel leading to oneness. In meditation, I set the intention to learn stories of lives in parallel and dream worlds. And I then feel I am tapping into millions of dreams and lives on a thick tapestry, wherein each experience is like one thread in the tapestry. This is overwhelming. How do I focus on just one for this story? Okay, so he puts a humongous row of dominoes on his desk, and then he used his little tapping device that he as a professor is using today to get our attention. And he tapped on the end of the desk, and then the desk expanded. and then he tapped on air, and then there was another portion of the desk that grew. It's like the desk is growing and growing and growing, and he's going doop, 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 doop. And with the original desk, there was this snaky line of dominoes, and then he walked around, tapped the beginning of the dominoes, and I'm watching them fall, and I'm watching them, and I'm watching them. And as he gets to what I would perceive to be the end of the desk, he taps in air again with his little wand, if you will, whatever that is. And then more desk continues, and then more dominoes appear, and then they fall. And then he taps again into air, and then more desk appears, and more dominoes appear, and then they fall one by one. And this is continuing and continuing and continuing. And he said, one law that began in what you call the beginning, and he goes back to the original domino that fell, has such an effect on all of these parallel existences that continue and continue and continue. If you attempt to focus merely on the beginning domino that you pushed in either obeying or disobeying a law that you created in the physical universe, it affects all of the other dominoes in every universe physically, and you are strictly creating again and again and again. And of course, it is overwhelming when you are not asking to tap into an adjacent universe of higher mind construct. Then you can perceive the law of cause and effect without a beginning, without an ending. You perceive beginnings, and then you wait on an ending, and then you say that you're overwhelmed. And he's tapping and tapping and tapping into air, creating more desks, more dominoes, more desks, more dominoes. He said, if that is strictly your focus, my student, of course you are overwhelmed. And he puts his hands like this. So he said, I ask you to switch your intention in the beginning of your writing daily, and asking to understand the laws of parallel existence in the adjacent universe of unwritten law. And then I ask you to connect the dots of these storylines in the adjacent universe of mental constructs when you have perceived that you are spirit, or that you are dead, as you call it, when the body departs its grand gesture. So I simply ask that your inquiry and intention be different. And then you will be less focused on the overwhelming, chaotic laws of your strict physical universe and the many parallel existences that are infinite within them. Because otherwise, this goes on and on and on, and he keeps tapping, 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 tapping in air, and then creating, and then more dominoes, and it is very overwhelming. Yeah, please stop now. So you need to switch your point of focus, he says. And the way that you do that is by setting your attention into the true version of now. Ask your higher self for your true version of now. It's an immensely profound being. Let's see if we have another question. Okay, we're back to Jesus's question, and he said, will spiritual abilities such as levitation and telekinesis and flying by thought be allowed in this present dimension, or is it something for fourth or fifth dimensions that the earth is headed towards or going into? If it is allowed now, how can one learn now? He said there are strict laws of safety. Can you operate in an adjacent reality of spirit essence and use these laws that are less strict, such as levitation and telekinesis? Yes. Can you learn them in a physical reality? Yes, as long as fear isn't prevalent in the human brain. Once fear becomes prevalent, and that is the majority of the collective dream at this time, then it dissipates because of the strict primitive law that fear creates over and over and over again. And he pushed the dominoes down backwards this time. So it's not a matter of allowed or not allowed. You must stand beyond this thinking, my student, he says. Calls everyone his student. Okay, let's go back to Another question that I received, let me find my list of questions on my screen. Oh, so the question is about children who are unborn or aborted, and the person wanted to know about that being soul essence and do they reincarnate or not, and what that general experience is about in universal laws. He says the majority of souls who are reincarnating now in your creative constructs of the physical will enter a fetus shortly before they're born. They will enter during birth, or in some cases, after birth. And you have mislabeled and misperceived the afterbirth souls entering as autism, when simply this soul is waiting to make its awareness and appearance to you and to fully pull in its essence to a point of awareness in physical constructs within itself and for you. If, for example, a mother is considering an abortion, then the soul will be aware of that and can choose not to incarnate. Therefore, there is no harm to be felt in terms of what you call physical suffering. So the suffering that you and the grief and the shame that you are imparting upon yourselves is not necessary. If a soul enters a fetus and a fetus is thereby aborted, the soul does continue on to experience many other lives and many realms and many dimensional adjacent existences. Some souls will seek an in utero experience and have a wish to never be born. They wish to merge within the essence of the mother in a very unique way. Therefore, it is contracted in your physical universe between mother and child, and the mother will honor the child and choose to terminate. And this is nothing to be sad over, for both souls seek this experience and there is no suffering in such. The child simply did not wish to be born in a physical plane of existence. It simply wished to make the mother aware of its loving presence. Some souls seek to be in a place to teach you this, a place for forgiveness and compassion. Remember, there is no actual death anywhere in any universe. Even the cells of a fetus reincarnate, each and every one of them, into another entire essence and soul in various infinite universes. Okay, let's look at another question. I'm glad he's doing well without a facilitator. I was really nervous about that. Is the golden age of Aquarius to be enjoyed by the third dimensional collective or by whom? He said, what is done in what you call a third dimensional collective is being done in various universes, much in the same way that one belief is a domino that affects another. And when dominoes are adjacent, they affect another. Would you choose to perceive this cause and effect law in adjacent universes as good or bad, as right or wrong, as punishment or reward? Only you can choose to enjoy this or not. So there are various infinite degrees that continue onward from what you call a third dimensional collective. It's not a matter of by whom. Many races, many species enjoy it in continuing infinite creations, most of which are parallel in physical universes. Okay, let me look at another question that I wrote down. There was a professor who also followed Seth, who's been a professor of math, over in Columbia, South Carolina, and he sent me a whole list of questions just in case you guys didn't know who he was. And I've been looking at those questions as well, just in case you weren't sure what to ask. He wanted to make sure you knew what to ask because he's been studying Seth material for a good 19 years or so. So he wanted to ask about each of if there are infinite incarnated selves in 4 different universes, when we talk about time and space, he wanted to understand what that means, like what the illusion of time and space encompasses. He said time is the beginning of the physical and mental universes that you call creativity, that you call now you new babies call these third dimensional existences or third dimensional planes of existence. I love how he's referring to Aquarians, all of us as babies. It's so really cute. He said, so time and space, again, are illusions of the mental construct within your parallel dimensions of creativity. So both the past and the future coexist with the present. And this is how the layers of your ego operate with self. So being that, again, I will repeat, past and future, although they are illusion, coexist with the now. And what I can now refer to as the spacious present. Spacious, he moves his hands like this. It is wide, it is infinite, and it is always expanding. And he moves his dominoes in the shape of a Fibonacci spiral, and he tapped the one in the center, and they're all going outward now as opposed to up or down in the metaphor that he used prior. So we have this, this Fibonacci spiral. He tapped the domino in the center, and then they begin to create more dominoes that are falling over. And they actually, when you tap one domino in the center, it created the vision of another domino. And he said, it's not really there, but you think it is. And you call this time. But there is a space that is created before I tap my wand from a thought and before another domino appears to you. I call this the spacious present. You new students call this the now. Therefore, an individual's incarnations in different time periods are actually lived simultaneously. You simply are not aware of this as of late. So this is not consecutive. This is not that I tap this domino and then something else that wasn't there is created. An illusion is there. And now he shows me all of the dominoes being there that are ever expanding, always, always, and always. And he shows me spirit visages. He calls it a spirit visage of a domino. And he said that essence is always there, but you have created the form of a domino to appear in between it. Just like get complicated. And he said, and now you are aware because I tapped it. But they were always there. And he shows me like shadows, essences of dominoes. But when he tapped it, then I could see a form, and then I could see falling, and then one affecting the other, affecting the other, affecting the other. But he shows me this entire image of an ever-expanding visage of spirit dominoes that just are always there. I want more information. Thank you. When you attempt to communicate amongst your various awareness of past, present, and future lives, as you call it, I will call it selves for point of reference. This occurs during your dream state, and you are now accessing it through the brilliance of hypnosis and other techniques that you call a journey. And then time appears to exist in a linear form because of the limitations strictly inherent in your physical laws that you have created from the psychological level of the human mind. But all of you create your own circumstances and experiences within this shared creative environment that you call Earth, as if it is the only one, because it is all that you can remember that you know. And similar to the doctrine of responsibility and assuming responsibility, which you have widely mass perceived for accountability, there is something that you have said within what you perceive and misperceive as universal law of attraction. You have stated, I create my own reality, and therefore I am responsible. And this statement is frequently misused in your point of spacious present. And this concept does not originate with me, despite previous channelings in your time sense of awareness. The inner self is responsible always for the construction and maintenance of an individual's physical form and of an immediate awareness of physical environment. But the events and the circumstances, however, unfold according to your outer ego's beliefs, attitudes, and assumptions. This is not fair. This is not unfair. This is not rewarding. This is not punishing. This is not good. This is not bad. This is not sin. And you're also not angels. And he looked down again like that over his glasses when he said, and you're also not angels. So he means to say, don't. Just corrected me. He said, don't tell them what I mean to say. Just repeat what I say, student. He said, if you're responsible for the construction and maintenance of your physical body and immediate physical environment, and your events are unfolding in the way that you believe and in your attitude that is structured therefrom, there are productive or unproductive attitudes and constructs of belief that are thereby translated into your reality, like it or not, fearful of it or not. And thus, one of the intrinsic tasks of the self is to learn how to direct his or her thoughts in beneficial, constructive, positive, and expansive directions. So let's remember the message that I sent to a friend of Jane quite a time ago in your physically constructive environment. And I stated, and I quote, you must observe the pictures that you paint with your imagination. You allow your imagination to be in full reign. And if you read this early material that I have presented through Jane, you will see that your environment and the conditions of your life, like it or not, at any given time, are the direct result of your own inner expectations. Expectations are quite the tool of your unfolding imagination, are they not? You form physical materializations of these realities within your own mind before they become present in your spacious awareness. And if you imagine fearful circumstances, possibly painful circumstances, possibly horrible circumstances, if you imagine ill health, if you imagine absolute desperation and loneliness, those situations will be automatically materialized, whether you're aware of them or not. In your time constructs, you will state to yourselves, I was happy and functional one day, and the next day I had cancer. The thoughts themselves bring about the conditions that will give them reality in physical terms immediately, and then you become aware of them at a point of existence in your spacious present. And if you would have good health, then you must imagine this as vividly possible as you fear ill health. You must imagine the opposite. Behind every illusion of fear is its grand teacher of love. Remember, you create your own sufferings. And this may be a difficult lesson that I impart today, but this is true for each individual self. The inner psychological construct is projected outward, gaining physical reality. And this fact and law, regardless of the nature of the physiological state, is true. And this natural law applies to everyone. It is not punishment, and it also cannot reward. And you can use these natural laws for your own benefit and change your conditions once you simply realize what they are. You cannot escape your attitudes and the energy essences that become formed thereafter. If your attitudes are based upon expectations of something that is outside of the spacious present, you mean the now? He said, yes, do not interrupt. He's not sure he likes me much. Okay, repeat, please. You cannot escape your attitudes when they involve expectations, for they will form the nature of what you see. Quite literally, you will see what you want to see, whether you deny this or not. And you will see your own thoughts and emotional attitudes of expectation materialized in physical form at some point of your spatial presence, despite your denying of such. And if changes are to occur, they must be mental, and they must occur at the level of psychic energy. This is the electrical universe. And these changes will be reflected in your environment also immediately. It's a matter of how quickly you will become aware of this change. Negative, distrustful, fearful, shameful, degrading attitudes towards anyone, you or others, will work against your true divine self nature on all levels of creative universe. So then you're going to ask me, how does this apply to God? And is there one? And I will state there is God. Is there a God? Yes, unified parts of fractals of wholeness. And we can refer to that God as the am that I am, or all that is. And this can be described as a primary energy field, if you will. And this God, as you call it, is comprised of self-replicating, inexhaustible mental energy, and it contains all of creation within it. God is therefore a present field of all existence. So this is a field being a whole, which is greater than the sum of its parts, as you would say in science. And this mental energy of God is the composite substance of all things that you call matter. It becomes form. The mental energy of God is this substance of things, and it is included in all beings, all universes, all events, all phenomena. God's conscious level of awareness will extend into things as they are created, and it is therefore omnipresent. And for these reasons, all things in existence, including physical matter, have life and consciousness. And if God wishes to experience existence in all of its forms and creative ramifications through its creations, it is able to do this. God is therefore dynamic, ever-changing, ever-moving, and it shares in your failures, your triumphs, your perfections and imperfections, as you call it, of all of its creations. And all of the parts of selves, all of the individuals that exist within God, through part of God, have creative free will and self-motivations, self-driven determinations. And if there is a reality outside of God, I am certainly unaware of such. He grew quiet just as quickly as he talked incessantly. I'm going to look at your questions again. Someone said my brain hurts. He said, well, get out of it then. And he tapped on your head like this, as if you were instantly out of it. Did you feel it? It was funny. He was literally standing right beside you, Anya, and he like tapped on your head with his little teacher stick. Why does manifestation appear to speed up? He said, you became aware of the infinite nature and complex nature of your thoughts simultaneously, and then the only reference point in your physical reality from the mental construct, and the only explanation would be that time sped up. You are simply becoming aware of time. Would you say that the speed of light gets faster? In science, you would not. You, with your reference point of the past, might perceive that it would take months or years because your concept of time is limited. Therefore, you cannot possibly perceive the incessantly expanding speed of that which you call light, which holds the infinite access to creativity of God. So for something to be manifested in the physical that you would be aware of, it would indeed be perceived as very slow. If you are operating outside of the laws and physical realities, and within the less stringent laws of mental constructs in an adjacent reality, then of course you would perceive it faster if observing from the human brain. What are your views of New Earth? He said, nothing is new, nothing is old, everything simply is. When you expand your perception and you are operating outside of physical laws of form, then you can perceive that it always is. You are simply now aware, but in operating in the old construct of past, you will perceive it as new. He still wants to know if you felt his tap on the head. Not for the person who got the tap, the gentle tap with the thing. Someone had asked a question about, from the Christian perspective, Alpha and Omega, beginning of time, God created the earth in 40 days. This person had asked a question about creation and what Seth thinks of those stories in Genesis and the Bible. And I thought it would be fun for him to answer. And he said, the forever exhausted mental explanations continue. There was a creation in your physical world, but it differs remarkably from your biblical version of stories. In what you call God's early stages, the universe existed in a state of potentiality within what I will now refer to as God's dream. And God has multiple dreams existing simultaneously, and the power of God's infinite consciousness was so great that his children, if you will, because that's what you prefer to call yourselves, I will simply call them individuals. These individuals in God's dreams had self-awareness because that is what you wanted. And then they desired to be made real, to see themselves, to feel a different level of reality. And this creation occurred when God learned the means to make these dreams real. So there is one who you call the Christ, who still exists remarkably in a highly evolved entity who has existence in many systems of reality. However, the Christ has the same relationship to God that all individuations do. In other words, you are a fractal of beingness of God. And at the time of your awareness of the Christ, This entity that you call the Christ incarnated as three individuals that you now refer to as the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. And I find that quite amusing. Holy Ghost. I'm not sure how a ghost could be holy or unholy, but nonetheless, at this time and point of the spacious present in your stories, you knew this Trinity as beginning with John the Baptist, Jesus of Nazareth, and Paul, or Saul, or Thomas, or Tarsus, if you will, and each was to some degree aware of his role in founding what you would deem, in that point of spacious now, a new religion. And although Paul, or Saul, depending upon what you believe, was not aware of his role until after his conversion to Christianity, Jesus, as you now call him as Yeshua, was indeed not crucified and is not in the nature of what you deem to be a sacrifice. For enlightened individuals would indeed not choose to sacrifice themselves at all. Rather, Jesus was a willing, although rather deluded surrogate to this theory, who believed himself to be the Messiah. And that is because collectively, that is what you wanted him to believe. And therefore, he collectively honored such a massive dream. So, another being, a rather willing surrogate, if you will, stepped into the body in Jesus's place. And it was this surrogate whom Judas betrayed and who was then crucified in that story. But again, there are various stories. There's another adjacent parallel universe where there was an escape from the Romans. There's another parallel universe where a being that you call Yeshua had a near-death experience and put his essence into physical form and lived for another 2,000 years and made his travels to Tibet and India. There are various stories of which we could presumably go on and on and on until you tire of hearing the inner time constructs. So if you ask how Jesus was able to be resurrected in one of these stories that you currently believe, is because he had not actually died to begin with. And the crucifixion in this story of Jesus did occur as a shared psychic event, but it did not occur as a physical event. So now perhaps with these explanations, you can understand how one domino affects another between physical and non-physical dimensions. He smiles and nods whenever he stops talking, so that's how I know to look at your question again and pull up my screen. He said, can you speak on the power of intention? He said, it is nothing without the power of your belief to withhold its expression or to garner energy to push that physical form forward. And he pushes down yet another, what he says are 3 billion years of dominoes. He loves these dominoes. Next question from Jesus. In order to let go of old ways of thinking, my question relates to evolution, civilizations, and ultimate maturity of the collective. He stopped you and said, my child, which one? Which collective? Ooh. You're going to make me trance on that? Is that why I'm sneezing? I often sneeze right before I lose consciousness or awareness of what I'm about to say. It's really funny. That or itching of my nose or my head. Okay, back to your question. Which civilization and from what part of our galaxy and when did any first take to space travel? He said, in which story, my student? There are various stories. Space travel is only even a thought or a glimpse of a thought in physical reality to assume that you cannot fly about in something that doesn't exist It's easier to fly about in something that doesn't exist than something that you believe that does. Now he wants me to get to the rest of your question. Did these life forms and civilizations evolve naturally, or were they created by the spiritual side once planets were formed? He said, your question, it really limits a perception within the physical law of time. You need to consider that all life forms, all civilizations can choose to evolve naturally or unnaturally, in form or not. And it's not a matter of when they were created and when planets were formed, for they always have been in existence. Some within form, some without, all existing with form and without simultaneously. So this question is thereby not applicable in any of the laws of consciousness except physical reality. So it's not a matter of if they were created by a spiritual side. Spiritual side cannot be created. It is always in existence. It's a matter of awareness of the mental construct within that realm. It's not a matter of if it were created once planets were formed. Planets are being formed and dissolved rapidly at the pace of a blink of one of your eyes. I'm going to look at a question that was sent to me in text earlier. I got to find it. It was a good question. Someone had asked the interesting question about, is Jesus currently incarnate now, or reincarnated now in this century? And, does he have to push another domino down? The person just said. I love having a professor simultaneously, like a mathematic professor, simultaneously listen and telling me these things, because he's like, oh, is this another domino that has to be pushed in another direction because it was a mistake that we crucified Jesus? Do we need to undo that and push the domino backwards in another direction? So in other words, he wants to know, was it a mistake, and do we need to correct it? And is Jesus going to come back to correct it? He says, the being that you at that time in your stories called Paul or Saul will reincarnate very soon within the 22nd century. And I know that I initially said the 21st. Time moves on, and he laughs and pushes another domino. It is something that you had perceived that would be a mistake to be corrected, and therefore that storyline will continue in the dream world. And it will thereby be a domino that is pushed backward into your physical world because you believe that it requires correction. When this essence of personality makes its way into the 22nd century, it will correct what you deemed a mistake that he made in that time story. And this mistake that you believe that he made set Christianity about on an awkward path, and all religions on an awkward path of disempowerment, into various constructs of powerlessness that are still prevalent today, when you fear them at least. You can choose differently at any moment of time, he said, and then he wipes the slate clean and all the dominoes appear in nothing but a visage and a spirit image of what once was formed domino. I have a headache. Sorry. He says, get back on track, student. There will be a period of spiritual awareness. You call this period New Earth, Aquarian Age, Indigo children, crystals, dolphin children, diamond children, channels, prophets. Could we go on and on? You are entering this precipice of time now. Is it not fun? Is it not fascinating? There is a period of spiritual awareness that is occurring now, and it will continue to prevail. And Paul or Saul will not identify himself as the Christ, for then you would certainly slaughter him as the Antichrist. And some will view Paul as the Antichrist, no matter what, since his appearance will hasten the dissolution and decline of all traditional Christed religions, whether you call and perceive them Christed or not. And this will be the dissolution of all other organized religions. And then Paul will be known as what you call a channel, a psychic, a prophet, and he will strive to fix or straighten out the misperceptions in Christianity, which will by then be in absolute shambles. And now when he said that, all the dominoes just flew into the air, and I could hear them cracking. I could hear them exploding, rather. It's very loud. It sounds like firecrackers. At this point, Christianity will be in shambles. And he will form a new system of thought. And the world is indeed in need of this. And the events surrounding the return of Saul will substantially be complete around the year 2077. I'm aware that I originally stated 2075, skeptics of this channel, but the ensuing changes to society will therefore birth a new century to unfold, which you are now calling Gaia, or the New Earth. And this has been hinted to you in many of your creative prophets, whether you call them actors or filmmakers or musicians or channels. And we have attempted to describe this throughout many measures. He wants me to look at your questions. Question from David Beasley. Men and women used to live around 900 plus years. Now the maximum life expectancy from birth to death is 100. He said, oh, is it now? He challenges what you're saying. He said, due to creative medical expansion in your technologies, we could perceive this to be a possibility, but the maximum life expectancy, well, then all of the attitudes of thought constructs that have become habits and attachments, you're lucky to make it to age 60. Nonetheless, I will ascribe to complete your question, and you ask, why the massive decrease in lifespan within this dream? He said, and it's, again, all habits, which are ultimately attitudes of attachment and expectations, are indeed death. Okay, he's talking about a biblical story. He said, I will share with you a story from your own very Bible, which you deem as sacred, but that is indeed laughable at times. I can't stay focused with his personality sometimes. I will share with you a story where God asked a certain prophet to slaughter his son for an indeed sacrifice. And was there a moment of hesitation? Yes. But before the knife could indeed plummet into the child, the faith of test was mastered. The prophet had one moment of time to not trust the degree of faith and hope that was implemented. And then he would have been stuck within the realm of physical time, and he would have indeed killed his child. His trust made him understand that death was not possible, and that this child was indeed not formed. There could be no restrictions. Prophets, psychics, channels, rishis and writers of various effect in these times simply knew beyond the constructs of physical law and therefore did not question, did not hold an expectation of death, because they are not limited through the laws of physical matter. Therefore, death indeed was not prevalent in the body. Okay, guys, we've had a good session. He wants me to go on. I don't. And he's being more gentle with me now because he knows that I'm tired and hungry in the form. So I'm going to go take to that care of the mind and the body and rest my eyes a bit and spend a lovely weekend with my family, because I think that everything else that he could teach you would indeed become a part of another session. So we're going to close out for now. Thank you. I'm sorry that we didn't have a facilitator, but it was quite fun just to kind of see if I could channel without one. And I chose to go for it and didn't feel limited at that time. So at this moment, it might be a different story about perceptions of limitation, but I'm going to go for now. And I'll see you next week for more sessions here on Patreon. Thank you again. If you're waiting on source tones, please know that my list is about 280 people long, and I'm doing anywhere from 2 to 15 a day, and I'm getting them done as fast as I can. So you will receive them in the email that you use to sign up with Patreon. But every time you send me an email asking where is yours, it takes us longer, because then we have to stop and finish your emails. Just keep that in mind. We're doing the best we can with that. And I appreciate your patience. I really do. So if you haven't received it yet and you have emailed us, please know that you're on that list and we're getting to it as fast as possible. If you haven't given us a little email, please do so from your Patreon inbox. Is the best way that we can track things, not from your original email. There's too many emails that come, to, my PamelaAaralyn.com address. So please don't send it there. Please send it to your Patreon inbox and you will be put on a list. And if we do not reply to you right away, please receive our earnest apologies and thank you for your patience. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.